Okay, to start. So Adam Blum is going to talk about writing mobile applications using Ruby, using Rhodes.
Testing? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm here today to talk to you about Rhodes, which is an open source framework for allowing you to build native apps for smartphones very quickly using Ruby and HTML. So the mission of Roamable is we want to allow you to mobilize your applications rapidly with a great user experience. We want to provide the high-level productivity and portability of web programming that you're all probably very used to building Rails apps, but still provide the device optimization and offline capability of native mobile apps. So that's an important distinction. We are not a tool for building mobile web apps. We're a tool for building native mobile apps that run locally on your favorite smartphone of choice. And all of this is, of course, open source for rapid adoption by developers, so you can easily get to it, and also so you can contribute to the framework if you so choose. And we have a lot of contributors throughout the world, actually quite a few European contributors as well. So some of the background, as you guys are aware, smartphone sales are exploding now. Even in the midst of global recession, there's still huge year-over-year growth numbers in smartphones. And there's another interesting dynamic going on now, which is that the growth leaders, right, iPhone and Android, are the installed base laggards, especially where you talk about enterprise apps. So if you're talking about getting stuff that's used for business inside a company, there just aren't, I mean, I love my iPhone, right, but there aren't that many of these devices. So at a lot of, a very typical scenario, Rhodes is used all over the place, but a very typical customer scenario is that it's a web developer, right, a Ruby on Rails developer, and they get demand for a smartphone interface, very often iPhone. I mean, certainly iPhone's the thing that's initially driving it. And they say, I really don't want to learn Objective-C, right? So we want to let you use all your familiar Ruby and HTML skills to do it, to build smartphone apps. And initially, it could very often be an iPhone app, but then we want you to have the maximum reach for your app, right? If you've invested in the iPhone app, you don't want to just restrict yourself to iPhone users. So we then let you build with the same source, we let you build native apps for all those other devices. So the other thing that's sort of nice in 2009 is, if I was giving this presentation 2 years ago, I'd have to talk about why you really want to, build native apps versus building, using mobile websites. Luckily, we don't really have to talk about that anymore. Of course, it's a billion iPhone apps as of April 23rd, not 800 million. Slides are a little old. And so now in 2009, we no longer have to sort of sell people on that. It's what users want to use. They want to use native apps, thanks to the iPhone and the App Store, but also running everywhere else. People expect to run native apps, and that's what developers want. So at this point, we never get up and say, you should really use native apps versus mobile web apps, because it's just what users want to use. And every once in a while, somebody will say, well, can I use your stuff for mobile web apps too? And we just say, no, that's not what we're about. Right? If you really want to write a mobile web app, we're not sure we think that's a compelling category, but if you do that, use Rails to do that. But how do you write an app for all popular devices? So this is what Rhodes, that's the motivation of Rhodes, and this is what Rhodes is for. We want to let you build the application quickly in HTML and Ruby. And of course, the HTML and Ruby is just what you're used to with Rails, right? Model view controller framework. You do all your templates in HTML, HTML templates, ERB files, and then you do your controllers in Ruby. You write it once and it runs on all smartphones. It works with synchronized local data, so that's a key thing. So it's all about, we have a client for a mediating sync server that we have called Rosync that sits out in the cloud. You host it somewhere, you can use a hosted copy of it, and then Rosync connects to your backend system, and it handles the job of transparently getting that data down to the device so that your users can use that information when they're offline. There's an interesting little spin-off of doing this synced local data thing. So for users, it's great because you use the data when you're offline and disconnected. But it actually, because we're all about ease of programming, we got this unanticipated benefit for programmers, which is that it simplifies your programming model. So we give you a very lightweight ORM on the device we call ROM. It's similar to Active Record or Data Mapper, but very simple. Very, very simple, very small. Because everything in Rhodes is about being really, really small to fit on the device. And so that makes things fairly easy. I'm sure I don't have to sell this audience on the benefits of an ORM, but testing? Great. Okay. So, another unanticipated benefit of having the sync local data is it actually makes your programming model for doing a disconnected app or for doing an app that connects over the internet much easier, right? Because you're writing your app, you always just assume you have your data locally. You're not writing any stuff to fetch stuff over the wire and, marshalling JSON or XML or doing HTTP. In fact, we do not even include net HTTP by default in Rhodes. We actually give you instructions on how you can add any Ruby library you want, but we don't include it by default because it turns out that the easier programming model is just assume that all your data is local and we sort of just handle keeping it there for you. Now, none of that says that you must do a synced local data app. We actually have a bunch of apps that are out there that don't even synchronize data to the back end at all. They just do interesting, cool, local stuff on the device. In fact, there was one, the latest one I got informed about was an app that's on the App Store called On Your Means. We're actually using it to sort of keep track of our expenses for this trip. And the guy wrote it in less than 40 hours and put it on the App Store. And he doesn't use Rosync at all. And it works fine because it's stuff that runs locally. Okay, so we also want to let you exploit device capabilities, GPS, PIM contact information, camera, including capturing stuff from the camera and then syncing it back to the back end using this Rosync thing, and SMS. All of this is available open source real time at github.com roamable. There's 2 projects there. There's Rosync, there's Rhodes, and then there's this Rosync server, which, by the way, that Rosync server is, of course, a Rails app. Okay, I'm happy with this if you want to just, yeah. I'm good, thanks. Don't want to make any more technology choices here. So, you can also install this with gem install Rhodes. And there is a tutorial, very thorough tutorial up on the wiki. If you go to roamable.com or you go to that address, wiki.roamable.com, there's a tutorial that takes you step by step through building this. There's actually a bunch of third-party stuff that's starting to appear. Like there's There's a developer in London. His name is Euruko2009, and he is building a mobile Twitter app, and he's actually established an entire blog about step by step how to do it. So needless to say, because it's longer, right? It's an entire blog. He's much more thorough than our stuff. Our stuff is sort of terse. His stuff is actually much better if you want that much more step by step approach. So what are the roamable components? Well, there's Rhodes, which is this micro framework for building locally executing natively optimized mobile apps. You run this app generator, which I'll show shortly, for your objects of interest, and then you edit HTML templates. We were talking earlier about how so many of the things are sort of parallel between Adhesion and Rhodes. So the demo may seem somewhat familiar. It also, Rhodes, and this is of course appropriate for a Ruby conference, hopefully you guys will be excited about this. It contains the first mobile Ruby implementation for every single platform. So the first mobile Ruby implementation for iPhone, the first mobile Ruby implementation for Android, for Symbian, now some of you might say, hey, there is a mobile Ruby implementation for Symbian. There is the Pragmaticom implementation, and that is out now. Pragmaticom basically did Symbian's Ruby implementation. Ours actually dropped first, but we're actually excited that they're there because that's like one less thing that we need to maintain. So we're talking with the Pragmaticom guys about how we converge so that there's sort of one Symbian Ruby and that we're using that Ruby. The other thing to emphasize is, I'm definitely proud of the work that the guys did in building this first mobile Ruby implementation, but as cool as it is, and on some of these platforms it'll probably be the only Ruby for 2, 3, maybe more years. But long term, I'm actually pretty excited about other people putting the Rubies on there, because people say, well, you're the mobile Ruby company, and maybe we are now, but that's not really the way we think of ourselves. We think of ourselves as we're the open mobile framework company. So it's really about the framework, right? So it's really about Rhodes and the framework and the ability to write your apps mostly in HTML and the sync stuff and the device capabilities. That's really our core. And so the sooner that like iPhone comes out with their own Ruby, I'm sure they will. Apple likes Ruby. It's a good thing. They'll come out with a Ruby. That's a great thing. That's like one less thing that we have to maintain. And then we just worry about the framework on top of the Ruby. So speaking about the things that we're excited about the framework, there's another thing is this RoSync, which, as we mentioned, is a mediating sync server, that you install on a server somewhere. It is a Rails application like any other Rails application. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing. I'm more of a server developer than a device developer, so I'm spending most of my time maintaining RoSync stuff. So you can see all my check-ins on GitHub. So what RoSync does is it's a sync server focused on web service data. So those of you that are grizzled vets like myself remember the days of things like IntelliSync, which Nokia bought and then discontinued, or Motorola Starfish, or there's been lots of sync servers that are out there. It's Sybase iAnywhere, and all of these sync servers were focused on the problem of how do you sync with backend databases, which is actually, ironically enough, it's actually a harder problem than syncing with web service data, but it's still a bit different. In other words, doing it so it works with web service data well and makes it very easy for developers to build what we call source adapters that connect to their backend thing. It's just a bit of a different beast. And in fact, one of the guys that applied to be our VP of BizDev was the VP of BizDev at IntelliSync, and he said, if IntelliSync had made that shift to deal with SaaS data where you don't have access to the data, software as a service, web service data, then they'd probably still be around. The product would still be around. So RoSync was written from the ground up to talk to this software as a service data, and we ship with adapters for things like Siebel and Sugar CRM and Lighthouse and Salesforce and a whole bunch of stuff, but we're really not trying to be in the sync server business or we created this as a tool to just enable Rhodes. So we ship with a few source adapters. We show examples of how easy it is to build source adapters, and the idea is that we make it very easy to build your connection to whatever back-end system it is that you use. That said, I was saying that we're sort of not trying to say, sell Rosync in and of itself. So we're actually working with Sybase Anywhere. Some people want to work with their existing sync server, and they have a compelling sync server. So there'll be an announcement later of how people can use the Rhodes app with other sync servers if they choose to. None of those other sync servers, the real thing that drove the creation of Rosync is none of those other sync servers were open source. And so we're an open source company. We had to write Rosync because we needed an open source thing for our developers to use. Okay, so good segue to talk about architecture here. So everything in red here is stuff that we provide. And of course, we've got this Ruby interpreter here. We have this ORM, which we call ROM. So it's just a very simple, lightweight ORM. And we have support for SQLite behind it, and also support for HSQL, and also support for PerseLite. And I should talk to the data objects guy about probably doing some kind of abstraction in between so we can make it easier to go to other databases. But that's what we have support in ROM. Those are sort of the leading smartphone device databases. DB4O is also in there as well. We don't have support for that yet. Somebody wanted to contribute that. That'd be great. So we have this Rosync client that's sort of transparently synchronizing the data to this Rosync server, which is just a Rails app out there. And then there's a web server here. Now, you as developers don't even need to worry about the fact that there's a web server here. But does anybody have any guesses about why there's a web server running on the device there? So it turns out the reason we did that is because, now unbeknownst to the user, we said we let you write your apps in HTML, but the apps don't look like web apps by any means. And we'll talk about how we style the HTML so it looks native. They all look like native interfaces. But we're absolutely using the browser control that ships with every smartphone to make it easy to let you write your HTML, and then it does our rendering for us. And then we style it to look like the native controls. But in order to sort of get that great advantage to us, which is using the native browser control, this browser control is expecting to talk to a server. So we give it a very, very small web server to talk to. This might be it's the smallest web server that we've ever seen. And it just does barely enough to keep this browser control happy. So that's all the innards, and you guys don't really need to worry about it is a Ruby conference, so I like to talk about what the details of the technology are. You really just write all those gold things, right? You write a controller in HTML templates just like you're used to in Rails. And then if you're doing sync data, you don't always have to. I was mentioning examples of other apps where they didn't do sync data. Then you write what we call a source adapter, and I think that's sort of the standard terminology in the sync server industry. That connects to the backend app. And that source adapter is just a handful of methods. It's basically 6 methods: login, query, create, update, delete, log off. So you just write that for whatever your backend is, and then you have sync data. And the good news is on the controller and HTML templates, just like Rails, we have an application generator, just like your friendly scaffolding, where we generate HTML and templates. And what we've seen is, for people that are building sort of third-party apps that ship on the App Store, yeah, they spend a lot of time, actually don't spend much time modifying the controller. We give you basic CRUD operations just like Rails does, right, for create, read, update, and delete of whatever your object is. But no question, for a third-party app that you're going to put on the App Store, you'll spend a fair amount of time branding it in the HTML, right? Changing the fonts, putting images in there. So there's no, the good news is that you spend more than 90% of your development typically in just the HTML templates. What we've also found, though, is in enterprise scenarios where people just want they just want the mobile data, right? They don't really care. It's like if you can let them edit offline, they are happy with a plain vanilla interface. And so then we've actually seen people that just do the app generation and they just run with it, and just stick with the standard generated app. So what are these apps? This slide's somewhat dated. There's a lot more stuff out there now. But we ship with a couple apps just to show you what you can do. We ship with this Sugar CRM app that we call Rhodes CRM. All the codes available up online. We ship with a Siebel Field Service app. But there's a whole bunch of third-party apps out now. There's an app on the App Store called Issues to Go. There's an app on the App Store called Pixelpedia. Lets you take a picture and then it geotags it based upon the GPS coordinates, and it looks it up on Wikipedia and says, this is what you just took a picture of. It's sort of cool, especially if you're in some beautiful place like Barcelona being a tourist. I've been having a lot of fun with Pixelpedia on this trip. So Wikipedia, most of you are probably familiar with who Hampton Catlin is. He's the inventor of Haml, really, really bright Ruby developer. And so he saw our stuff on Ruby Inside like last December. I guess we got coverage with them. And so he got rid of the existing Wikipedia iPhone app that was written in Objective-C and rewrote it in Rhodes with 20% of the code. So it was 1/5 the original size. We're working with BMC and this company called Aeroprise that's doing a very large, extremely large, and also will be widely deployed app. It's basically the next mobile interface to BMC Remedy. So very, very important for both companies. And they're doing it all with Rhodes. And just, I did update the slide with just like the latest story I was telling you about that On My Means app, and that was pretty cool. The guy posted on our forums, our Google group that's out there, and said, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I put this app out there and I did it in less than 40 hours and it just works. And I really like his app. So he was an example of somebody. We are, as we said, we're open source under GPL. So the vast majority of people are actually executing a commercial license with us because they are they're not open sourcing it. However, Wikipedia is, of course, open sourcing it, so we don't get any money from Wikipedia, and that's fine. I'm happy to see that happen. Also, this guy, Paul, is making his app free, and he put it out there open source. And so we're not making any revenue from him either, and that's fine. I was actually really excited to see his app out there regardless. So here's the high-level overview before I jump in and build a Rhodes app. What is the development process? Well, okay, and this is only if you're doing a sync data app. Have to do. The first step is generally it's easier to start with your sync data. It sort of goes with the Rails philosophy of you've got your database there, and then creating models assuming the database is just easier. So we've definitely tried it both ways. Starting with the client app and then adding sync, or starting with the sync and doing the client app. You're welcome to do it whatever way you want. I've sort of found that it's easier to start, if you are going to do sync data, start with the sync data, create a sync source, define your sync source adapter code, and then you can test it from the web interface for a row sync, which is very plain vanilla, because I wrote it and I'm not the greatest web UI developer. But we actually have a contribution from one of our developers to make it much better. So we'll see if we'll accept that contribution soon. It'll look better soon. But so that you test it from the web interface, right, and you see that you're having all your data from your back end, you get that step done, and then you go to generate your app using this tool called Rogen that you get when you do gem install Rhodes. Now you can skip that first step, and we have a place in the tutorial that says, yeah, if you don't want to do sync data, just skip this step and start generating apps. So if you're doing that client-only thing like that On My Means app, they got to skip that step. So you generate an app, and then you generate. So you generate an app, and then you go to each model, each business object, and then you generate a model for each one of those business objects. So if it's like a CRM app, you might do a model for your account and your lead and your opportunity and your task and your support request. So you would generate a bunch of different models, and then you just go in and start editing ERB files. It's interesting. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I hate ERB. Do I have to use ERB? Can I use Haml?" So we did ERB just because, remember, we're all about being lightweight on the phone. So ERB sort of comes with Ruby nowadays. So it's very, very lightweight. The interesting thing was when Hampton started working on Wikipedia, I said, "Oh, this is awesome! You're using our stuff, and Wikipedia is going to be released on Rhodes. Do you want us to?" I said, "Look, we'll put Haml in there for you." And he said, "No. I totally get that it's all about being lightweight. So we'll probably stick with, if the inventor of Haml says just ERB is enough, we'll probably stick with it." So then you just build, test, and deploy. So you build your app just using you have two ways that you can build it. You can use the native IDE. So when I was first doing demos of this stuff, I would absolutely like fire up Xcode, and we're just a framework, right? We're not a runner that you have to download. In fact, we'll talk about, there's a number of reasons why that approach really wouldn't work. Apple would not like that. It's not the compelling way, right? We're a framework that compiles into the rest of your app, so you build a native app like any other app. So it's not, Gears or Adobe Air or any of those things that are trying to do these intermediate runners, and which doesn't really work anyway. So you can absolutely then use Xcode for iPhone, or you can use Visual Studio for Windows Mobile. And so when I was doing early presentations, that's what I would be showing. However, you're all Ruby developers, so obviously a much better way is just use Rake. So you can use the IDE, or you can use your Ruby IDE of choice. I like TextMate. I assume a lot of you guys do as well. Do all your stuff in TextMate, and then you do a Rake script to go do the build. So with that, let's just go ahead and build an app. Okay, is it possible to turn this on? I think it's going to be easier. Okay, is this working? Okay. So first, I've got this tool called Rogen. Let's go ahead and do. Yeah. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yes, I'm making it bigger. Okay, so you can see the options on Rogen here. One of the options is the available generators are to generate an app, a model, or a source. A source is used for generating the source adapter. It basically gives you that skeleton code of login, query, create, update, delete, log off. So we're just going to say Rogen app. So we're going to generate the app. Let's just run Rogen app so we can see the options on Rogen app. And so you can see the options are, it generates a new app, and then you basically give it the name of the app that you want to generate. So I'm going to say Rogen app, My Contacts. So you can see what it did is created a directory called My Contacts, and it generates an app directory within there. And so I'm going to go ahead and go into the My Contacts directory. And you can see there's some stuff there. But I'm going to go ahead and generate a model now, right? It's not going to do anything useful until I have some model. I might generate several models. So I'll run Rogen model. First, I want to just show the options available on Rogen model. So you can see it wants a name, a source URL, which if we were doing sync, we would give it the URL to the sync server that we have, and then a source ID, and then a set of attributes followed with data types. So, no, just attributes. They're all strings. We told you ROM was very simple. So we're going to say Rogen model contact, and then I'm going to give it a empty string there, and then we're going to say, I'll give it an ID of 1, and then we're going to say name, phone, city, state, zip. Here we go. Oh, what am I doing? No, it's just Rogen, name source URL. Here it is. Okay, so now we have our generated model, and so now we can just fire up TextMate and look at our app. So here's our app. Should look very familiar to you. I saw a lot of Macs in the room. Here's the top level of the app, okay? And we could put whatever we want at this top level. And this is typically going to be where you would do a lot of branding, you know, put your images. Oh, make it bigger. Yeah, I was doing that for some reason. Let's see. Huh. Yeah. That's the first time that hasn't worked. I've done. Okay. Yep. So I don't know why Command Plus is not working. That's never happened to me before. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's still not working. Weird. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to build a link in to that contact object. We could do a lot more. We could do, you know, it would be not unusual to do a lot more branding there. I just want to show you the actual generated templates here. This is where you would typically do a lot of editing, you know, depending on how branded you wanted it to be. So this is, you know, standard generated stuff. You'll notice that the HTML is very generic, and the reason for that is we want it to be generic, and we want to do the styling of it separately. So the idea is that we do the styling with a styling library that makes, even though it's generic HTML, we style it to look like a native library. So is anybody familiar with the first guy to actually build a library that did that? So it's this guy, Joe Hewitt, who now works for Facebook, built this thing called IUI. Some of you that are iPhone developers, I'm guessing you might have used IUI if you built a WebView-based app. So what IUI does is takes your generic HTML and then styles it to look like native iPhone controls. So they don't look like Safari controls, they look like iPhone controls. So it was a great idea. We like totally co-opted that. And so we started with IUI and we tweaked it a bit more even. And then we also did the same approach on Windows Mobile and BlackBerry. We haven't done a lot of styling on Symbian and Android. That's a great opportunity, especially for European developers that really understand Symbian more than we do and what it's supposed to look like natively. And we have actually talked with some developers about them potentially contributing that. But right now on Android and Symbian, it does look pretty plain vanilla. It doesn't really look web because you don't see a web browser, but it does look plain vanilla. So at this point, I'm not going to go make any particular changes there. But I'm going to go ahead and go back to my build environment or to my command line, and I'm going to run rake-t, and that shows us our list of available commands. And so you'll see that I've got commands like rake run iPhone app and rake device iPhone. So when I say rake run iPhone app, what this actually does is does the full build. And again, we could do this inside Xcode if you wanted to. If you prefer that, you absolutely could. It actually fires off the emulator, installs the application, and there it is. You could obviously, and probably would, change that UI to be what it is that you choose to. There's our link that we put at the top level. I can click on contacts and create a new contact. do the create, and it shows up on the list. I can create more contacts. So that's essentially the high level of what the development looks like. So I think, okay, let's hop back to the presentation, and then we'll see. There's something really exciting that I want to show you guys that I've never demonstrated before, and if we have time, we'll show it. So upcoming developments. We're doing a 1.1 release this month. The big thing in the 1.1 release, we did our 1.0 in let's see. Does this work too? Okay, great. So we did a 1.0 on March 24th at the Open Source Business Conference. We had other releases before that. They weren't buggy or betas or anything. We just didn't have all the OSs. So the big things in 1.0 was we added Android support. And so once we had all the smartphones that are shipping, we said, okay, we can call it 1.0 now. We also added camera support in that release. We're doing a 1.1 release sometime this month. The big thing about 1.1 is testing frameworks. We didn't have, like, if you use it today, we don't give you a capability like, you know, RSpec or test unit or anything. So we're adding that framework, and that will be released this month. The other thing is on Android and BlackBerry, the database and the underlying sync are a little slow right now. It's really the database that's our bottleneck. So if any of you have tried it, it's a little bit slow on those platforms, and we're actually we were using PerSlite as the database, and we're completely getting rid of that, and we're moving to HSQL or hypersonic. And we're also making the client sync better on those platforms. We're also testing the framework itself quite a bit. And what I mean by that is, like, some people say, okay, so these mobile Ruby implementations were sort of on purpose a subset so that we fit. And it turns out if you stay within the framework, you know, you're using framework generated code. We've yet to have a person that said, oh, you're missing this feature, right? Because we sort of have the stuff that you want. But we haven't gone and published, like, what's our full set of stuff that we support. So we are going to publish that once we have this test framework in place. We'll run all the standard Ruby tests, and we'll say, hey, here's what we support. But the big thing we're going to talk about this month at Interop next week, we are releasing this thing called RoHub. So remember I was saying how we're in parallel in so many ways. So what RoHub is, it's sort of our cloud thing, right? So what RoHub is hosted development. So you can edit online. How many people have used Heroku? So, okay. So what it does is lets you edit online, just like you did with Heroku. You actually do your generation, so you don't have to do command line scripts. I sort of think they're easy enough to use, but this is all just through the web. You know, you run the application generator, you say what attributes you have, you know, what models you have, define the attributes on each model, and then it just generates all the stuff right from a web page, which is a bit easier than this. But the thing where it's really easier is you can do all your builds online. And that's like a huge improvement, right? Because today, if you don't have a Mac, when you do your build, well, you can't really build for iPhone, right? If you don't have a Mac. So we're providing rake scripts, right? But there's no magic. You know, we had to have the iPhone SDK installed there somewhere. So it lets Windows developers build for Macs, and it also does the converse. It lets Mac developers that maybe don't want to install VMware or Parallels or whatever get to build for everything else, because as you probably know, like BlackBerry and Windows Mobile and Symbian like require Windows Mobile availability. The other thing is it solves the thing. We have a lot of Linux developers that are interested, and they're totally out of luck, right? They can't build for either one, but if you use RoHub, then they can do the build. So that's probably the biggest value there. But we've gone further, and we actually provide hosted. So that's the development time story. Then at runtime, we have this hosted runtime. And what does that mean in the context of a mobile app? Because you say, well, wait a minute, isn't it all about that you're running on the device anyway? What are you doing on the server? So what that is we have an OTA, I guess the industry buzzword, an over-the-air provisioning server. So what that OTA provisioning server does is lets you expose a URL to your users. It could be like mobile.yourcompany.com. Then the user goes and enters that into their browser, and our OTA provisioning server detects it and then sends them the appropriate built executable, right? And we're in a good position to do that because you probably did your builds there, and so they're all up there anyway. So then you just give out that URL to the users, and then we send them the, give them the link for the appropriate download, whether it's a cab file for Windows Mobile, app, a sysx file for Symbian, COD file for BlackBerry, APK file for Android, whatever it is. We also have a sync server. So those of you that go and look at RowSync, we've had some people look at RowSync, and it's very clear that it's made to host multiple apps, and then not just multiple apps, but also multiple sort of administrators that have their own space of apps. And so some people have said to me, well, why do I even need that? If it's just for my company and fine, I'm hosting 3 apps, why do I have to have this complex model of, hopefully we expose it simply, but why do we have this model of multiple administrators in the apps that they expose? It's because we knew the whole time that we wanted to do RowHub. And so that's why the sync server was built the way it is. But we host that for you so that you don't have to install your own sync server. All that said, we do think that the way RowHub was primarily created as just a way to help people get going with Rhodes quickly. So the beta is free, and we are announcing the public beta later this month. But when we go out of beta, we'll go to some kind of cost recovery charging model, right? We just want to recoup our Amazon EC2 bill. So we'll have a hopefully simple pricing model that will allow us to recoup those costs. But we think, so the purpose is really just to get people as productive as quickly as possible with Rhodes, and we actually think a typical scenario will be, you get it built and then you start getting lots and lots of users, and then you'll probably just pull your own, put up your own copy of RowSync. We're really not trying to be in the, we're the cloud for, billions of users doing sync, which is sounds like a difficult business to be in, so we're not really going to try to do that. There's more coming. It's important, as I was saying, we don't really know everybody that's using our stuff, but because if you use it and open source it, you don't have to execute a commercial license. But it is good to tell us about what you want beyond what we have now. We will eventually do all device capabilities. We've done the ones that we've done now based on developer demand, what they said they wanted. We are committing in the next 2 or 3 releases to doing accelerometer support, video capture, audio capture. We're doing about a release a month, so those will show up in the next couple releases, but we want to know what you want beyond that. We want to know what our developer community wants, and we absolutely prioritize our features based on that. So an example of a recent example of listening to our developers and what they wanted is this guy who did On My Means. Everybody on the forums like, you're giving away free, you should try to monetize it with ads. And so he's saying, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. It turns out we have this ad service sort of almost ready to release, and we weren't going to do it like early because we thought, hey, the whole point is to like get people productive building their apps first, and then we'll make it easier for the ongoing life cycle of their apps. But there was a bunch of threads on the Google group saying, hey, you guys should really do it faster. So developers want it, so we're going to push up the release of that sooner than we otherwise thought. So I'm going to do a quick summary, and then I'm going to see, how are we into, no, we're not going to have time beyond this. Okay, so I was considering doing a RowHub demo. Which I put VMware on my machine just for that purpose, but no time. So, I'll just mention why I'd put VMware. So one of the cool things, some people will say, wait, how do you test this? You had to test it on your iPhone thing. So one of the things that we have in RowHub that makes it a lot easier to do testing, one of the things that we have in there is we actually have a Win32 runner. So we just for even though we're all running Macs at Roamable, the people that wanted the quick testing was typically people that didn't have, iPhone's actually not that bad for doing the quick turnaround testing. People that had Windows laptops, however, were saying, oh, doing the full lifecycle testing on Windows Mobile was really, hard and time consuming. So we did this Win32 runner. So on RowHub, when you build your app, you can actually download a Windows app that does what your app does and to test it. So the summary of why roamable is our declarative tag-based approach, we think is more productive. Okay. Okay. And we think a rich client against local data is much better than remote web apps. That's probably not a hard sell nowadays. We want to let you write it once and have it work on all smartphones, and it's open source from the ground up. So do we have time for questions?
So we have a suggestion from the technician about the mics. Thing is, the bottom part of the mic is communicating with an antenna over here. And if you cover this part even partially with the little finger or something like that, the sound can get cut. So the suggestion is just hold the mic near the top, like this. Okay.
Okay, I was.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. All right. So we are quite late, but I think that the talk has been really interesting. So I think it could be good just to do a regular round of questions and just adjust the schedule later. Good.
Hi. How do you deal with the constraints that the iPhone has in terms of memory usage and how much you can have in the database, et cetera? What kind of help do you provide in terms of dealing with those constraints?
So, should I just? So what we do is our big goal was that the entire framework plus the developer's app would always be less than 3 megabytes. And it turns out that on like this iPhone, that still gives you room for over 5,000 Rhodes-based apps. So that 3 megabyte target was aggressively low, and you can still have a lot of apps. And maybe it's not 5,000, maybe it's 4,000. To get around all the, iTunes that you have on there. But so the target was 3 megs, and the guys have really done quite a bit better than that. So most apps are coming in below 2.5 megs, which tends to not be a problem. So we even had third parties. Ars Technica did a write-up on our stuff. The guy built his own Windows mobile app. It's interesting because he could tell that we're very iPhone-centric, I guess. So he said, let me see this Windows mobile stuff. And it worked just fine. And his app came out to 2.3 megs. So, I mean, you're absolutely right, though. It's all about being small. Like making Ruby plus an ORM plus a sync client plus a web server, right? All of that fitting within less than 3 megs was a real challenge.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I really like what you've done here, so thanks for the talk. But what I'm wondering is, you're using, you're allowing us to use Ruby and HTML to build cross-platform web apps, and
Yes.
That's cool.
No,
it's
not
Ruby
cross-platform web apps.
Okay.
Very important.
Sorry. Native apps. Sorry.
Okay.
But that's also the cross-platform. I think is also a big pitfall because I don't know if anyone ever used Java for mobile, but it's pretty. It tries really hard to be generic, so it works on every device and it looks always a bit native. But it also means that it also always looks a bit awkward, and it's really hard to circumvent Java there if you want to make apps that just work good on a device like an iPhone, even though it doesn't support Java, or and a Symbian phone, that just has slightly different controls and just makes it feel awkward. How do you do that? How do you? Is it easy to have different interfaces for different devices, to have device-specific stuff in there?
So there's probably there's 3 big aspects of that you I think hit on the first one, which is that it has to look good everywhere. So we did this with that CSS styling library, and if you actually look at it's not with just our idea that you can get good UIs for that. If you've seen on the iPhone App Store, a very large percentage of apps are now using the web view control, and a large percentage of that percentage are using the IUI styling library to give you, yes, you're still using the web controls, right, but you are getting a native looking appearance. So if you look at a Rhodes app, right, the selector boxes are the standard scroll wheels, for example. And so we think we've done a good job on iPhone, Windows Mobile and BlackBerry also. And I'll be the first to admit that, like on Symbian and Android today, which may or may not be, sort of core to your stuff, it looks pretty plain vanilla on those two devices. But remember, we're not a black box, so this CSS styling library that we give you, like, you can just look at it. It's right in your directory tree there. And so you can add value to it and say, you can either, like, for example, style it on Symbian the way you wish to, or you can even change. You can say, okay, good, nice try, Roamable, but I like my styling on iPhone better than yours. So I think you're absolutely right. It has to look great on every device, but I think the approach, and it was really pioneered by Joe Hewitt, of styling the CSS handles that part really well. The second piece is device capabilities. And I'm not sure if you were directly getting to that, but that's absolutely a huge piece, which is you want to take advantage of all the capabilities of the device. Some people sometimes say, what do you guys see yourself doing engineering-wise over the next several years? And it's going to really be all about device capabilities, because there's just more and more interesting things. And that's where the common API, though, like you don't have to go write 5 different GPS implementations or 5 different camera implementations. You use our one common Ruby API and it works everywhere. So I agree with you, but in a way, that's sort of, people say, well, you're sort of done. What do you spend your time doing? And it really is about just making it work great on every device.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. On the iPhone, you use WebKit basically, to render.
We use, yes, correct, absolutely.
So I saw your little application with the bar at the bottom.
Yeah.
And I know that in WebKit for the iPhone, you cannot have a static bar at the bottom. So does that mean that?
Oh no, we have a separate control. There's the web is for the core thing, and then we have that bar at the bottom.
So you have solved that, okay?
Correct, which is not the web control, and we did that really based on user feedback, because we wanted to create sort of idiomatic apps. And by the way, that when I say that a large percentage of these apps on the App Store use web view control, that's what they're doing, right? It's web view for the thing, and then they have the bar at the bottom. So that bar at the bottom right now is a nav bar, those of you that are iPhone guys, but we actually had some requests to have it be a tab bar, which more and more people are starting to use. And so we'll add that option as well. And this is part of our whole, let's make sure it looks like a native app.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question. I'm wondering, because basically Cocoa and Objective-C doesn't handle any garbage collection on the iPhone, so you have to release memory explicitly. And I'm wondering, how do you handle memory management within the Ruby application, because it can get quite unwieldy, I reckon, after it runs for a while, and you're not doing any explicit releases of the objects you're using within Ruby. So how do you handle that issue?
Right. I mean, it's absolutely, that was part of the challenge of making a good Ruby for that device, but it absolutely does, run and handle memory properly. And in fact, that was a big theme of this release, is making sure that we were having a good testing framework and really, exercising it so that it effectively, deals with that limitation.
So do you use automatic garbage collector, or do you have to release memory explicitly as a sort of...
It is explicit. It absolutely is. It's all written in C, and one of the things that we did, I don't know if anybody was using the project a while back, but we actually, the current iPhone implementation is much faster than if you used it really early, 01, 02, or 03. 1.0 is... at least twice as fast. And what we did is we actually looked at the enterprise Rails code where they did the TC malloc that does write-back caching. So we introduced that on all our C implementations, which includes iPhone, and we got a double speed up. It used to take about 5 or 6 seconds to start up, and if you run any of these apps that we've seen in the App Store, you'll see it takes between 2 and 3 seconds.
All right, thanks.
If I understood you correctly, you can do this OTAP thing, send the user a URL, and he gets the executable to his mobile device. How's that going to work with the iPhone?
No.
I think there's going to be a problem with Apple, isn't it?
No. We're not going to do it for iPhone. Correct. So
Okay.
we're not going to do runtime. we're absolutely not going to do runtime distribution. You'll be able to develop your app, but we're not going to do runtime distribution. You could say potentially you could do it using the enterprise license, where people could supply us their enterprise license and all the information, and then we would allow them to do that version of it, or potentially even ad hoc distribution where you're providing people's iPhone IDs, but that's not going to be done in early versions of RoHub.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. It's an excellent question. Yeah, we're not trying to be sort of another app store, right? We assume you'll develop it with it, and if you're for your iPhone distribution, you'll do your distribution on the App Store.
Hi, can you tell us something about the commercial license? How is it going to look like?
So we have two flavors. If you are not going to be open sourcing your app, then as he was bringing up, you would need to execute a commercial license. We have the ISV flavor, so you're a software vendor, you want to sell your stuff, and then we ask for a very small percentage of your revenue. It's 5%. My VP of sales was here, he'd be mad at me mentioning the specific amount, but it's 5%. We haven't had anybody say that's too high or that it was somehow an issue. We just want to share in a small way in your success. And then the other flavor of license is an enterprise license, because enterprise are typically not charging their users, to download the app. They sort of say, you have to download the app and use it. So for enterprises, it's a per user per year charge. And my VP of sales has a rather complicated spreadsheet of tiers of numbers of users and size of enterprise, and I can't keep track of it. I would quote it if I could, but I can't keep track of it.
More questions?
Something I would offer, I don't know if people are interested in it or not, but I said I was ready to demo RoHub for the first time if necessary. If it seems appropriate, maybe, I don't even know if you have slots for it, I could come back at the lightning talks and give a demo of RoHub.
In fact, there's a talk at 5 o'clock, which it's going to be very short, like 20 minutes, something like that. Perhaps we could improvise something and, right, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so
Cool.
thank you
Okay,
and see you later.
thank you.